Reddit users from the US. What surprised you about your trip to Europe?
Main thing that cracked me up was how people view distances. I was in Hartlepool, UK for work and wanted to go out and have fun. One of the locals said, "Well, you could go to Newcastle, but it's a long drive." It was like 30 frigging minutes away, which is nothing to me. I live in Houston and it can take over an hour to drive across the city. God forbid you want to drive across Texas. I went to Tiger by the way. That shit was intense. The rivalry between the people that live 20 minutes away was odd to me as well. Like Rotterdam versus Amsterdam have a big rivalry, don't wear the wrong team's jersey in the other city kind of stuff, which is really crazy to an American. That would be like me having some huge rivalry with someone in Sugarland, a city outside of Houston. We really don't have crazy rivalries like that, except for people who live in Boston. Other things. The public transportation was amazing. I was surprised by all the people pissing in the streets. The racism is interesting, more out in the open, and people really say what's on their mind, which I appreciated but also found rude. The age coins for cigarette machines were funny. Lastly, all the young people at the bars were kind of a trip and made me feel really old and weird. Edit. Spelling edit. To all the Americans that are saying things like, "Well, you obviously haven't been to blank or heard about blank and blank. Go YouTube some European soccer hooligan riot porn and that's what I'm talking about. Not stealing the other team's mascot and spray painting their statue." I also was not aware of the Duke and Chapel Hill rivalry. I've received so many messages about this. And after sophomore year in high school, while playing soccer, football, with my homestay family and experiencing my first ever drunken holy shit moment, I realized, leaning quite defeatedly against the goalpost, I might add, that if I didn't know I was in France, I would have assumed I was in America. In my head it was always just a place, but somehow not really real. That there were people with lives and sports and homework and petty dramas that plagued me back in America. They were people, not the French. It's hard to explain, and I'm sure I sound like a f***ing idiot right now, but I'd only ever prepared myself for the differences, and never considered that basically everything other than language was indistinguishable from its American alternative. I got off the train in Bayeux, France, near the Normandy beaches. I was there for the tapestry. I was shocked to see a huge English sign saying "Welcome to our liberators" directly across from the train station. I was not shocked by how dilapidated the sign had become, as that certainly wasn't the reception I got in France. That night I stayed at a hotel called Le Relais des Cedars in Bayeux. It is still open according to the internet. This was 2002. The owner was a lady who looked to be in her mid-140s, wearing an actual 19th century pelisse and carrying an actual riding crop, with which she actively beat her dog. I am not making any of this up at all. That night in our room, we saw her communion pictures on the wall, which looked to have been taken in the summer of 1879. They were like daguerreotype looking things in bulging circular frames, not flat like a normal photo. I still recall her freaky 7-year-old eyes looking out at me as the French Olympics announcer freaked out about ― who had actually managed to place 7th or something in the downhill event. French Olympics coverage is just as biased as ours, only obviously for the French, who aren't as competitive. The next morning I had a lovely breakfast of pain au chocolat, but the hostess did not make an appearance. I have strongly considered the possibility that this was my first ghost sighting, and I would be even more freaked out had she not been arguing with the couple formerly occupying our rooms that they must pack up their shit and leave as Madame et Monsieur sont ici. Mr. and Mrs. are here. When we arrived, we were decidedly not a Mr. and Mrs. at that point, but hey, things were old-fashioned before World War ITL. Dr. France is a strange country full of strange people. I studied in Madrid. In Spain it's culturally acceptable to stare at others. That definitely weirded me out a bit. Also, I volunteered in an elementary school classroom and the teachers were, from an American perspective, almost cruel to the children. One young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, spilled paint on her paper and requested a new piece from the teacher. He then proceeded to yell at her and call her an idiot and humiliate her in front of the whole class. All of the students fell silent, including the girl being yelled at. She basically just stood there while he hollered, said yes sir when he finished, and sat down and tried to resume work with her ruined paper. Edit. So apparently most teachers at elementary schools in Madrid are nicer than the one in the classroom I volunteered in. Does it make a difference that it was a private school prep academy for rich kids? I visited Europe in 2010. Everywhere I visited I had different experiences. Paris, France, first country I visited. Definitely not a great place to be American. People took one look at me and scoffed at me. Never been flipped off so many times in day before. And nearly everyone I spoke to saying I don't speak French just stopped talking to me altogether. Also the Eiffel Tower wasn't that great either. Just a giant non-functional oil rigmarole. One of the worst experiences I've ever had. Switzerland, second country I visited. Completely opposite of France. Better food, nicer people, awesome scenery. I even met a few stoners that asked me to smoke a joint. Way better experience. Even got a Swiss Army knife. Austria, third country I visited. Went to Salzburg and Vienna. Also nice people and were just as interested in learning about my culture as I was theirs. And really great food. Wiener Schnitzel FTW. Italy, fourth country I visited. Went to Venice, Florence, Pisa, and Rome. Great people. Crazy drivers, awesome food. Authentic Italian pizza is best pizza. Also gelato is the best thing on the planet. The heat was oppressive, especially in Rome. But it's Mediterranean weather so I got over it. Got my first underground experience too. Overall experience was great. Never going to Paris again. As for the rest of France, probably will visit anywhere in Normandy. I need to get back to Switzerland ASAP though. I was only there for one day and it definitely wasn't enough. Castles. Everywhere. I love Holic in Wales, but especially Italy. We took the kids with us to a wedding in Tuscany. It was in the southernmost castle of the Medicis. But the kicker was that we were staying in another small castle that was on the outskirts of Siena's historical influence. They looked at each other across a valley of vineyards and horses. They were opposing castles. Also, the food in market towns. Unbelievable. It was incredible to buy fresh bread at the bakery, then sausage at the pig parts place. I'm sure there's a better name, then wine, then cheeses and olives. And we ate it all on top of our tower while keeping our peeps on those cursed Medicis. Edit. Spelling. Countries are so small and close together. You can visit multiple cities or even multiple countries in one day. You can find something absolutely amazing wherever you go. But most Europeans simply take it for granted. I remember being awed by walls that were built by the Roman Empire. They're just so amazingly old. But all the Europeans just shrugged like it was no big deal because they are surrounded by those amazing historical and cultural landmarks all the time. I remember seeing a group of kids eating McDonald's, talking on cell phones, and playing hacky sack in front of a freaking palace. I guess it was just surprising to see the mix between historical awesomeness and real people having real lives that happens over there. In the US, we have a few amazing natural sites, but our cultural sites are so young, and you have to travel for days to get from one amazing site to another. The differences in distance are crazy. I had been hearing my whole life that the French would hate me as an American tourist and would be very rude and scornful, particularly in Paris. But when I finally went to Paris and everybody I interacted with was at worst normal and usually friendly and helpful. I had been invited to go on relatively short notice, so I didn't have time to learn more than a little French. So I was at everybody's mercy, yet almost all of them spoke enough English for us to communicate fairly well and many spoke it very well. People were so friendly and helpful that I felt guilty that we would not be able to return the favor if a French person who barely spoke English visited any place in the US. So that was a surprise. Another surprise was how awesome the Paris metro was. What a dream. I could get anywhere easily in 15 minutes maximum. I was surprised by how small and cramped a lot of things were, from Scotland all the way down to Italy, most notably cars and hotel rooms. I was surprised by how bad the gypsy thief grifter packs were there. Jesus. I wanted to light all of those motherfuckers on fire. Free healthcare. OMG. When we were traveling in Copenhagen on a super tight budget, I got a very mild infection. It started getting worse, but I was terrified to go see a doctor because my insurance wouldn't cover anything outside my home state, let alone out of the country. Even when insurance does cover a simple emergency room visit in the States, we can expect to pay $400 easily after copay, physician fees, hospital fees, and prescription costs. And you are never given an upfront cost. Until the bill comes in the mail, you don't really know what they will charge you. Let's face it, USA, our healthcare system is some shady bullshit. While in Denmark, that infection got so bad I couldn't stand it anymore. So our friend finally convinced me to go to the emergency room. We waited about 1 hour before being seen by a doctor, about the same wait time as a busy US emergency room. I was stressed out as shit because I figured I was about to blow the remainder of my travel budget. After a pretty good exam, I was given an antibiotic and that was it. I couldn't believe it. I kept asking when I should expect a bill and tried to give the receptionist my credit card. She smiled and said something along the lines of, "All people have a right to be healthy here." I had never realized just how much I and my family stress out over medical costs until that moment. Was exchanged from New Hampshire to France for a summer when I was 7 or 8. My dad and an old college buddy decided it would be cool to swap kids for a summer. I spoke no French and didn't want to be there. I'd heard they ate snails and had packed an entire suitcase of cereal to survive the ordeal. It was pretty much same old with funny tasting milk and nobody speaking my language until we went on a trip to the local river. I was absolutely shocked when all the other kids just stripped naked and jumped in the river. I held out for about 2 hours. At one point some of the kids in the river started chanting something that was clearly making fun of me. I asked my host for a translation and she told me they were saying I had a donkey's tail that I was hiding, which was why I wouldn't disrobe. I sat on the banks of the river surrounded by people enjoying themselves in various states of scandalous undress, relaxed, happy, naked children and naked adults swimming in the river, topless and bottomless people tanning on the beach. Getting hotter and hotter and sweatier and sweatier. Eventually I broke the nudity taboo that was instilled in me by prudish America since birth, and the world did not end. In fact, nobody had a shit to give. There was nothing inherently wrong or shameful with the human body in general or mine in particular. Some rules are stupid. It was a very formative experience that causes me, many years later, to admit my parents were right. I did learn a lot and I am glad I went. Though not, perhaps, for the reasons they'd been intending. I was in Latvia for a month, and what struck me more than anything else was how thin everyone was. No fat chicks. Seriously though, everyone walked everywhere and ate so much healthier than us. I felt gigantic and most Americans wouldn't consider me fat at all. And the food was amazing. I don't know where the Latvian jokes come from. Their food is awesome. As a high school foreign exchange student in the very late 90s in Germany. These are a few things that stuck out from my travels around the area, both positive and negative. This should not be taken as representative of the entire country, but rather things that I saw that were commonplace. No one smiles in the Czech Republic. Hungarians were very warm and gracious hosts when visiting their country. I think we sometimes generalize Eastern Europeans as hardened and cold people. Austrians gave a good running for most racist and xenophobic country in Europe. The disparity between the Turkish and white Germans. Beer at McDonald's. I lived in Dresden and the light rail was really nice. No one ever checked for tickets and I asked what if you didn't buy a ticket and my friend said, why would someone do that? The ability to buy beer and wine at 15 years old to bring it to a school hosted summer party where students drank and smoked cigarettes with faculty. The skinhead looking guys that would hassle foreigners and non-white people. They were affiliated with some political group, but I can't remember which one it was. Similarly, I went to the Love Parade in Berlin and alongside of it was the Hate Parade with tons of skinheads playing really terrible screamo style music. Actually wanting to drink non-carbonated water was looked at as weird. Going to a music store and being able to open up the package and listen to the album before buying it. Oh, and the word schwarzer music, black music, which would totally not fly in the US. Not only was it common to not shower every day, but I noticed a lot of people wearing the same pants the next day and things like that. Washing machines in the kitchen, So you have mutilating to be washed while everyone is eating breakfast. I know a lot of countries do it this way because of space, but I just found it odd to be folding underwear in the kitchen, drinking soda at room temp. I hated it then, but I usually drink it like this now. Dinner like 4 days a week was fresh brown bread and a spread of different cheeses and deli meats. ᴬः-̓ᵮ. Having to be quiet during certain times of day and on Sundays. Similarly, having everything close so early and on Sundays. I was coming from San Diego and was used to a 24/7 style of living. Germans love mixing different types of drinks together. Apple juice and carbonated water, sure, that is pretty refreshing. Banana juice and beer? No thanks. I think that's about it for now. Rampant racism is in countries that are supposedly more progressive than we are. In London, it seemed like anyone white was fine. Anyone Indian or Pakistani was a class lower, and any poorer Muslims were gypsies and weren't even worth mentioning. Likewise, any non-Nordic people in Norway, though I didn't spend much time there. I'm from Lab. We have our fair share of racially influenced classes and a long history of race issues, but I know very few people who actually regard other races as inferior. My friend's theory is that Europe had a long history of bloody wars over religion, and so much of Europe is religiously easygoing or outright atheist. America doesn't have that cultural history of religious strife, but we do have it about race, so racism is considered really shameful. TLDR, in my experience, the UK is racist the way the US is religious. I've only been to the UK, but the one thing that impressed me was the absolute politeness and almost joking attitude that was had with socially awkward moments. We were ice skating and two blokes bumped into each other, falling flat on their asses. Here's how their conversation went. "Alright there, chap. Bit of a mess here." No, I'm fine. "How are you? You landed right on your fanny. Must have been quite painful." "Not at all. How's yours? You took quite a fall. Don't fret it. Have a good skate." You as well. In the United States, the reaction would be subdued, like, "Are you alright?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "You yeah, alright. Sorry about that." I was surprised how amiable everyone was in Britain. London felt a lot like any metropolitan city in the US. I didn't feel out of place there at all. The only oddity for me really was the age of the buildings, and traffic was on the wrong side of the road. Oh, and how curvy the roads were. I'm quite impressed with Germany. It was never a place I thought about visiting, but I'm glad I did. Once again, I didn't feel too out of place, but definitely felt like I was somewhere else in the world. Once I figured out the train system, I was very impressed with how spot on the schedule was. The only delays I encountered were due to weather, and even then they weren't off by much. You hear about this in the States, but I never thought a system that big could be that accurate. After spending some time there, I realized things are pretty much the same no matter where you go. It may be slightly different, but everyone deals with the same bullshit as here. I traveled Europe last summer with my grandfather, a World War II veteran. We followed his trip across Europe as a 19-year-old soldier. The hospitality shown was remarkable. I will hold a special place in my heart for the people of Belgium and Luxembourg. In Belgium, we were treated to dinner by a family who owns a village pub restaurant. Almost the whole town came to say hi and share drinks and food. It was amazing. We met some young guys who had a passion for the local war history. They were able to retrace the movements of my grandfather's division in so much detail, more than my grandfather could hope to remember. I was lucky enough to host them for a couple days stateside later that year. I hope to make it back soon. As for the rest of Europe, loads of fun, easy travel, great food and drink, many friendly people. Only complaint was not being able to have ice in my drinks anywhere. Sometimes the wait service was slow or almost non-existing. I think this was just a culture difference coming from an East Coast city in which having to wait for anything for any amount of time is grounds for complaint. Thanks Europe. France, smoking everywhere. Some shops were practically unbearable because of the smoke. Also, nudity, ads for things, topless ladies, etc. There was some public TV show at like 9 PM that had full frontal nudity. I didn't understand what was going on, but 14-year-old me only cared that one girl had her nethers dyed green. Also, a concert during Bastille Day. This was in, I think, Nice, but I can't remember, and we saw kids about my age drinking. and I smelled something one of the older members of our tour group claimed was pot smell. Later life confirmed this. Police were walking around through the crowd and gave no shits. That was bizarre. Everything was insanely expensive. Bottled water was well over €2 and it was really hard to get drunk on a budget. Ice isn't standard in drinks. A large soda in Europe is equivalent to a small in America. Drink refills in restaurants seem to be unheard of. In America, restaurants want you to eat and get the hell out. Over there, one meal seemed to take 2 hours. Teeny, tiny, sensible cars. I assumed I was going to stick out as an American, but people would wander up to me speaking Dutch or German. I did my best to blend in with simple skirts and tees. What the hell is up with showers? Maybe it's a hostel thing, but the shower seemed to always consist of a shower head with a drain in the floor of the bathroom. Getting the entire bathroom wet. Isn't mold a major problem? Public transportation is amazing. I visited France and London for a day, in 2005 I think it was, while spending a couple weeks with a friend. One of the most surprising things was how suspicious they seemed of me when I got off the plane. This was probably because my passport had no stamps in it yet and I was traveling alone, but eventually they seemed satisfied. Paris felt like a very laid-back place despite its enormous size. It didn't feel like people lived their lives in a rush. London was having a very grey and rainy day when I visited there for a day, but it felt exactly how I expected it to feel, and seems like a place that is much more accurately depicted in movies than America is. It was kind of awesome going into a pub and seeing soccer on every TV and a bunch of locals talking sports. It is such a similar thing to what you see in bars in America, but just felt way less trashy. As far as I know that was just the UK version of trashy. Who knows? Paris though. It was like a whole other world. I very nearly tried to find a way to stay there. The French greeting was something I struggled with, as some people I met did 4 cheek kisses while others would do 2 or as many as 6. It felt like an odd face handshake of sorts and I never knew how many times to go in. I may have been a bit spoiled when I was there because I was staying with a graphic novelist and his television executive wife, who were my friend's parents. But the wine was incredible. Edit. The graphic novelist was the one who illustrates Blackstad, so their home just on the outskirts of Paris was probably not a common type of residence. I knew nothing about it until I met him and their family, but I remember being pretty impressed by it. My friend helps a lot with translating the series into Spanish and English. Went to Germany for a month in high school. I was surprised by how everyone spoke English to me, even when I did not want them to do so. I had heard stories of people saying that in another country you should always speak the language if at all possible, and if you do not, or worse, you expect people to speak English to you, you will be met with a lot of hostility. I went as part of an exchange and lived with a family for a month. I was hoping to greatly expand my German language knowledge, but nope. I was placed with a family where the father was an English teacher in the high university and he and 3 of the kids were fluent in English. The wife and the toddler were able to speak broken conversational English. Every single store I went into I would attempt to converse in German to the very best of my ability and every single person spoke English to me. The exception was when I got lost on a train route and tried asking for help from a woman who did not speak any English but with gestures, broken Spanish, and my low-level German skills. We figured it out and I was on my way again. Smiley. I was truly hoping that everyone would allow me to speak German and practice, but everyone seemed to be fluent and the moment I struggled with a word they spoke English, which made me sad. Even worse were the students at the school who were so excited to practice their English and wanted me to read out of their English textbooks so that they could hear the proper pronunciation, which was odd, given that their teacher was from England and had far more proper pronunciation than I ever will. Lol. I was sad to spend so much time and money on a non-touristy trip away where I could immerse myself in the German language and everyone spoke English. Oh well.